The mop bucket wheels squeaked against the marble floor as I pushed it down the executive hallway at 2:47 a.m. The sound echoed through the silence like a confession I wasn't ready to make. 23 floors above the sleeping city, Meridian Financial's headquarters gleamed under fluorescent lights that never dimmed, and I was invisible in the way that cleaning staff always are. Just another shadow moving through spaces where million-dollar deals were made, where people in $1,000 suits decided the fate of entire companies without ever noticing the woman who emptied their trash cans. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and for 3 years, I'd been the night janitor on floors 20 through 25. I knew every stain on every carpet, every coffee ring on every conference table, every forgotten file left scattered across mahogany desks. I knew which executives stayed late, which ones left their offices in chaos, and which ones treated the cleaning staff like furniture. What they didn't know was that I had once commanded a platoon in Kandahar Province, that I had carried wounded soldiers through mortar fire, that I had 3 Purple Hearts collecting dust in a shoebox under my bed. The transition from Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen to Sarah the janitor hadn't been a choice. It had been survival. When you come home from 2 tours in Afghanistan, with shrapnel scars across your back and nightmares that make sleep feel like enemy territory, you take whatever job keeps the lights on. The Veterans Affairs Office had promises but no positions. The hiring managers had sympathy but no openings for someone whose primary skills involved tactical planning and keeping people alive under fire. So I learned to clean offices instead of clearing buildings, to mop floors instead of leading missions. Tonight was different, though I didn't know it yet. Tonight, as I moved through the executive suite with my cart of cleaning supplies, I was thinking about my daughter Maya. She was 7, with eyes that sparkled like black diamonds and a smile that could light up the darkest corners of my heart. She was also asleep 3 bus rides away in our studio apartment, where the heater worked sporadically and the walls were thin enough that we could hear Mrs. Rodriguez's television until well past midnight. Maya didn't know about the Purple Hearts. She didn't know about the firefight in Helmand Province, where I dragged 3 soldiers to safety while bullets carved the air around us. She didn't know about the IED that left metal fragments in my spine and earned me a medical discharge. She only knew that Mommy worked at night and was always tired, that we shopped at thrift stores and counted quarters for the laundromat. She knew I was strong, but she didn't know I was a hero. Sometimes I wondered if the difference mattered anymore. The executive break room smelled like expensive coffee and leather upholstery. I wiped down the granite countertops where executives grabbed their morning caffeine, where they complained about golf games and vacation homes while I remained as invisible as the cameras that recorded everything except the worth of the woman cleaning around them. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had once been responsible for the lives of 37 soldiers. Now I was responsible for making sure their coffee pot was clean. I was emptying the wastebasket near the floor-to-ceiling windows when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate, the kind that belonged to someone who owned the space they walked through. I glanced at my watch. Nearly 3 in the morning. Most executives were home in their suburban mansions, but a few were known to keep brutal hours. I kept working, head down, invisible as always. The footsteps paused outside the break room door. Through my peripheral vision, I saw a tall figure in an expensive suit, silver hair catching the light. Marcus Holloway, the CEO. I'd seen him in the elevators, in the hallways, in the conference rooms where I cleaned around sleeping documents and cold pizza boxes. He was known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue, for building Meridian Financial from a small investment firm into a multinational corporation. He was also known for working impossibly late hours and expecting the same from his staff. I continued wiping down the counter, keeping my movements steady and quiet. In my experience, executives preferred their cleaning staff to be efficient and unnoticed. The less interaction, the better for everyone involved. But tonight, Marcus Holloway didn't walk past. He stepped into the break room, and I could feel his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. "Long night," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of people. I looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time in 3 years of working in his building. They were gray, sharp, but not unkind. "Yes, sir," I replied, keeping my voice neutral and professional. He moved to the coffee machine, pressing buttons with the familiarity of someone who had made this ritual countless times. The machine hummed to life, filling the silence between us. I resumed my cleaning, expecting him to take his coffee and leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter and watched me work. "You're thorough," he observed, nodding toward the spotless surfaces around me. "Thank you, sir," I said, wringing out my cloth in the small sink. "I believe in doing the job right." Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of curiosity, or perhaps recognition. "Military background?" I froze, my hand tightening around the cloth. In 3 years, no one had asked me that question. No one had looked closely enough to see past the janitor's uniform to the soldier underneath. "Yes, sir," I said carefully. He nodded, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "I thought so. The way you move, the attention to detail." My grandfather was Army, World War II. He had the same precision. The coffee machine beeped, and he poured the steaming liquid into a ceramic mug that probably cost more than I made in a week. He took a sip, studying me over the rim. "Which branch?" "Army, sir." The words felt strange in my mouth, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. "How long?" 8 years active duty." I set down my cloth and faced him fully, unsure why this conversation was happening, but trained to respond when a superior officer asked questions. Old habits died hard. "Combat?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. I could feel the weight of it, the memories it threatened to unlock. "2 tours in Afghanistan, sir." Marcus Holloway set down his coffee cup and extended his hand. "Marcus Holloway. And you are?" "Sarah Chen." I shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the calluses that spoke of someone who hadn't always worked behind a desk. "Well, Sarah Chen, it's an honor to meet you." He said it with the kind of sincerity that made my chest tighten. "And thank you for your service." I nodded, throat suddenly thick. "Thank you, sir." He finished his coffee in contemplative silence while I completed my cleaning routine. When I was ready to move to the next room, he spoke again. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" I turned back to face him. "Of course, sir. Why are you here? I mean, why this job? Someone with your background, your discipline, your work ethic. You could be doing anything." The question I'd been asking myself for 3 years. The question that kept me awake during the few hours I had for sleep. The question that made me feel like I was drowning in a life that didn't fit. "It's honest work, sir," I said finally. "It pays the bills." "That's not what I'm asking." His voice was gentle but persistent. "I've been watching the work that gets done on these floors. Your work. It's not just thorough, it's exceptional. You don't just clean, you restore. You notice things others miss. You care about details that don't matter to anyone else. That's not just about paying bills." I felt exposed, seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly relieving. Old habits, I would cur.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"Suppose. Military habits," he corrected. "Leadership habits. So I'll ask again. Why are you here instead of somewhere that values those qualities?" The honest answer was too complicated, too painful, too wrapped up in rejection letters and discrimination, and the invisible barriers that stood between veterans and the civilian world that claimed to support them. So I gave him the simple version. "Sometimes life doesn't give you the choices you expect, sir." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I'd said. "Would you be interested in different choices?" Before I could answer, his phone buzzed against the granite counter. He glanced at it, frowning. "I'm sorry, I need to take this. But Sarah, would you mind stopping by my office before you finish your shift?" 25th floor, corner office. "I'd like to continue our conversation." I watched him leave, coffee cup forgotten on the counter, phone pressed to his ear, silver hair catching the light as he disappeared down the hallway. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the space he'd occupied, wondering what had just happened and what it might mean. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of routine tasks, made surreal by the unexpected conversation. I cleaned conference rooms where billion-dollar mergers were planned, emptied wastebaskets full of discarded dreams and crumpled strategies, wiped down surfaces that gleamed under lights that never slept. But my mind kept returning to Marcus Holloway's questions, to the way he'd looked at me like he was seeing someone I'd forgotten I used to be. By the time I reached the 25th floor, dawn was beginning to paint the eastern windows with soft gold light. The CEO's office was exactly what I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, mahogany furniture that spoke of power and permanence, walls lined with awards and photographs documenting a successful career. What I hadn't expected was Marcus Holloway himself, still there at 6 a.m, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a stack of documents. He looked up when I knocked on the open door frame. "Sarah? Come in. Please, have a seat." I entered cautiously, hyper-aware of my janitor's uniform in this temple of corporate power. The chair he indicated was leather, probably worth more than my month's rent. I sat carefully, back straight, hands folded in my lap. "Thank you for coming," he said, removing his glasses and setting them aside. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about choices and circumstances and the paths that bring us to unexpected places." I waited, unsure how to respond. "I want to offer you something," he continued. "Not out of charity, not out of pity, but because I believe this company could benefit from someone with your skills and experience. I'm creating a new position, Director of Facilities and Security Operations. It would involve overseeing all building operations, coordinating with security, managing vendor relationships, ensuring that everything runs smoothly behind the scenes. It's a position that requires attention to detail, leadership ability, and the kind of tactical thinking that comes from military experience." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand." "I'm offering you a job, Sarah, a real job. One that pays well enough for you to support your family. One that recognizes your capabilities instead of hiding them." "You don't know anything about me," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "I know you've been cleaning these offices for 3 years, without a single complaint, without missing a single shift, without letting your standards slip even once. I know you notice things others miss and care about details that matter. I know you have military experience and the discipline that comes with it. And I know that right now, you're working a job that doesn't come close to utilizing your potential." The words hit me like a physical force. After years of rejection, of being overlooked, of being treated as invisible, someone was finally seeing me. But the offer seemed too good to be true, too perfect to be real. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do this?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Because I believe in recognizing talent wherever I find it. Because this company succeeds when we have the right people in the right positions. And because sometimes the best leaders are the ones who've been overlooked by everyone else." I felt tears threatening, fought them back with military discipline. "I would need to think about it." "Of course, take all the time you need. But Sarah, before you decide, I want you to know that this isn't charity. This is business. I believe you can do this job, and do it better than anyone else I could hire. The question is whether you believe it too." I left his office in a daze, my cleaning cart forgotten, my routine shattered by the possibility of a different life. The elevator ride down felt like falling through layers of who I used to be and who I might become. In the lobby, security guards nodded as I passed, the same polite acknowledgement they'd given me for 3 years. But something had changed. Someone had seen me, really seen me, and offered me a chance to be visible again. The bus ride home was a journey through gray dawn light and awakening city streets. I watched delivery trucks and early commuters, people beginning their days while I was ending mine. But for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving the transition from night to day. I was imagining what tomorrow might look like if I had the courage to reach for it. Maya was still asleep when I got home, curled under the second-hand comforter we'd bought at Goodwill, her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. I stood in the doorway watching her breathe, thinking about the choices that had brought us here, and the choice that might take us somewhere else. She deserved better than a studio apartment with thin walls and spotty heat. She deserved a mother who was more than just tired all the time, more than just surviving. I made coffee in our small kitchen, the smell filling the tiny space with warmth and possibility. Outside the window, the city was fully awake now, millions of people pursuing their dreams and building their lives. For 3 years, I'd watched from the margins, cleaning up after other people's successes. Now I had a chance to build something of my own. The Purple Hearts were in a shoebox on the top shelf of our small closet, wrapped in tissue paper and hidden away like shameful secrets. I hadn't looked at them in over a year, hadn't wanted to be reminded of who I used to be when my current reality felt so small. But now I pulled down the box and unwrapped them carefully, holding the purple ribbon and bronze hearts in my palms. The first was from the firefight in Helmand Province, when our convoy was ambushed and I spent 4 hours moving wounded soldiers to safety while Taliban fighters tried to pin us down. The second came from the IED incident that left 3 of my soldiers with traumatic brain injuries and me with metal fragments that still set off airport security. The third was posthumous, awarded after I was medically discharged, for actions during a mortar attack that I barely remembered through the haze of pain and adrenaline. They were beautiful and terrible, these medals. They represented the worst and best moments of my life, the times when I had been most fully myself and most completely broken. They were proof of courage I wasn't sure I still possessed, evidence of a person I wasn't sure I still was. Maya stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about pancakes and cartoons. I rewrapped the medals and put them back in their hiding place, but something had shifted. For the first time in years, I was thinking not about the weight of what I'd lost, but about the strength of what I'd survived. When Maya woke up 2 hours later, I was making breakfast in our small kitchen, humming a song I'd forgotten I knew. She appeared in the doorway rubbing her eyes, hair sticking up in impossible directions. "Mommy, you're happy," she said, climbing onto one of our mismatched chairs. "What makes you say that?" "You're humming. You only hum when you're happy." I set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her, kissing the peepleen the top of her head. "Maybe I am happy, sweetheart." "Why? How do you explain to a 7-year-old that someone finally saw you as more than the sum of your circumstances? How do you tell your daughter that you might have a chance to be the person you used to be, the person she deserves you to be? Because sometimes good things happen when you don't expect them," I said, sitting down across from her with my own plate. "Like when we found that $20 bill on the sidewalk? Like that, but bigger." She considered this while chewing her eggs. "Bigger, like a $100 bill?" I laughed. Really laughed for the first time in months. Maybe. After breakfast, I walked Maya to school, holding her small hand in mine as we navigated the familiar streets of our neighborhood. The buildings here were old and tired, windows covered with security grates and dreams deferred. But today they looked different, less like a trap, and more like a starting point. At the school gates, Maya hugged me tight. "Will you be here when I get out?" "I'll always be here when you need me," I promised, though I wasn't sure yet what that would look like. I spent the day thinking, walking the streets, sitting in the small park where Maya and I sometimes fed the pigeons. I thought about courage and fear, about the difference between settling and surviving, about the choice between invisible safety and visible risk. I thought about the woman I had been in Afghanistan, the leader who had never backed down from a challenge, who had carried others when they couldn't carry themselves. That woman was still inside me somewhere, buried under years of rejection and disappointment but not destroyed. Marcus Holloway had seen her, had offered her a chance to surface. The question was whether I had the courage to let her breathe again. By evening, I had my answer. I called the number on Marcus Holloway's business card, listening to it ring while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Holloway. Mr. Holloway, this is Sarah Chen. About the position you offered." Sarah, I was hoping you'd call. I took a deep breath, tasting possibility on my tongue. I'd like to accept. There was a pause, then the sound of genuine satisfaction in his voice. Excellent. Can you start Monday? Yes, sir. Good. And Sarah, welcome back. Welcome back. As if he understood that this wasn't just about a new job, but about reclaiming a life, about stepping out of the shadows and into the light. As if he knew that sometimes the best way forward is to remember who you used to be. That night, as I tucked Maya into bed, she looked up at me with those sparkling dark eyes and asked, "Mommy, what's different?" "What do you mean, sweetheart? You look different. Like you're bigger." I smiled, pulling her blanket up to her chin. "Maybe I am bigger. Will you always be this big?" "I'm going to try." She nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense to her 7-year-old logic. "Good. I like you big." After she fell asleep, I sat by the window looking out at the city lights, thinking about Monday morning and the chance to become visible again. Somewhere in a corporate tower across town, Marcus Holloway was probably still working, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. He had made one decision that would change 2 lives completely, mine and Maya's. The Purple Hearts were still in their box on the closet shelf, but they no longer felt like shameful secrets. They felt like proof that I had survived impossible things, that I had led when leadership mattered, that I had been strong when strength was required. They were evidence that the woman Marcus Holloway had seen was real, had always been real, even when the world couldn't see her. For 3 years, I had been invisible, cleaning up after other people's successes, while my own capabilities gathered dust like forgotten medals. But invisibility, I was learning, was just another kind of camouflage, and sometimes the best surprise attack is simply being seen. Monday morning would come, and with it a chance to step out of the shadows and into the role I was meant to play. But tonight I was content to sit by the window and remember what it felt like to be a soldier, to be a leader, to be someone whose worth wasn't measured by the spotlessness of someone else's conference room. The city lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of their constellation instead of just watching from the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new chances to prove that heroes sometimes wear janitors' uniforms until someone is wise enough to look closer. But tonight, I was simply Sarah Chen, veteran, mother, survivor, finally ready to let the world see who I really was. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything feel possible. I stood in front of our small bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of the only professional outfit I owned. A navy blue blazer Maya had helped me pick out at a thrift store 3 months ago, when I still believed it might be useful someday. The fabric was slightly worn at the elbows, but it fit well enough, and when I looked at my reflection, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. A woman who belonged in boardrooms instead of supply closets. Maya sat on the edge of our bed, swinging her legs and watching me with the kind of intense concentration she usually reserved for her favorite cartoons. "You look like a boss lady," she announced, nodding approvingly. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, smoothing down my hair one more time. "That's exactly what I was going for. Will you have your own office?" The question caught me off guard. In 3 years of night shifts, I had never considered what it would feel like to have a space that belonged to me. Walls that contained my work instead of hiding it. I think so. With a big desk and everything? Maybe. She grinned, bouncing slightly on the mattress. "Can I visit you sometime?" "We'll see," I said. Though the idea of Maya seeing me in my new role, of her understanding that her mother was more than just tired all the time, filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. The bus ride to Meridian Financial felt different this morning. Instead of heading toward another night of invisible labor, I was traveling toward visibility, toward recognition, toward a chance to use the skills I'd buried under years of survival. The other passengers, office workers clutching coffee cups, executives scrolling through emails on their phones, didn't look through me the way they had when I wore a janitor's uniform. Today, I was dressed like them, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged in their world. The lobby of Meridian Financial gleamed under morning sunlight, marble floors reflecting the purposeful stride of employees beginning their day. The security guards, who had nodded politely at me for 3 years now, looked at me with mild confusion, trying to place my familiar face in this new context. I approached the main reception desk, where a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a warm smile greeted me. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Sarah Chen, reporting to Mr. Holloway's office. She consulted her computer screen, eyebrows rising slightly. "Of course, Ms. Chen. Mr. Holloway is expecting you. 25th floor. His assistant will meet you at the elevator." The elevator ride felt like ascending through layers of my old life into something entirely new. Each floor carried me further from the woman who had pushed a mop cart through these same halls just 3 days ago. When the doors opened on the 25th floor, a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes was waiting for me. "Ms. Chen, I'm Janet Morrison, Mr. Holloway's executive assistant. Welcome to the team." Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and there was something in her manner that suggested she knew exactly who I was and respected what I represented. She led me through the executive suite, past offices where people in expensive suits were already deep in conversation about market trends and strategic initiatives. "Mr. Holloway is in the conference room finishing up a call with Tokyo," Janet explained as we walked. "But first, let me show you to your office." My office. The words seemed impossible, surreal. Janet stopped in front of a door with a brass nameplate that read, "Sarah Chen, Director of Facilities and Security Operations." Inside was a space that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city I had only seen from service elevators. A mahogany desk that could have served as a landing strip. Leather chairs that whispered of important conversations and significant decisions. "It's beautiful," I breathed, stepping inside and turning slowly to take it all in. "Mr. Holloway wanted to make sure you had everything you needed to succeed," Janet said. "Your computer is set up, all your passwords are in this folder, and I've scheduled introductory meetings with the department heads you'll be working with most closely." I sat behind the desk, running my hands over the smooth wood surface. Through the windows, I could see the city spreading out below, millions of people pursuing their dreams and building their lives. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of that pursuit instead of just watching from the margins. "Ms. Chen?" Janet's voice brought me back to the present. "Mr. Holloway is ready for you now." The conference room was all glass and steel, a space designed for the kind of high-level discussions that shaped entire industries. Marcus Holloway stood at the head of a table that could seat 20 people, his phone still pressed to his ear as he concluded what sounded like a complex negotiation about international shipping routes. When he saw me, he smiled and held up one finger, indicating he'd be finished in a moment. "Tell them we need those containers moving by Thursday or the whole timeline collapses," he said into the phone. "Yes, I understand the additional costs. Sometimes speed is worth more than savings." He hung up and turned his full attention to me. "Sarah, welcome to your first day. How does it feel to be on this side of the building?" "Surreal," I admitted. "But good, really good." "Excellent. Coffee?" "Please." He poured 2 cups from a carafe that sat on a sideboard, handing me one in a ceramic mug that matched the one he'd used in the break room 3 nights ago. The coffee was excellent, rich and dark, with a complexity that spoke of beans sourced from places I'd only seen on maps. "Let's talk about what this job actually entails," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from me. "Meridian Financial occupies 12 floors of this building. Plus, we have satellite offices in 6 other cities. The facilities management aspect involves coordinating with building maintenance, overseeing all service contracts, managing space allocation, and ensuring that every inch of our corporate footprint operates at peak efficiency." I nodded, taking notes on a legal pad Janet had provided. "The security component is equally important. We're dealing with highly sensitive financial information, both digital and physical. You'll be working with our IT security team to ensure our physical spaces support our cybersecurity protocols. You'll also be coordinating with building security and developing emergency response procedures." The scope of responsibility was enormous, far beyond anything I had imagined when he first made the offer. That's a significant operation. It is. And it requires someone with the kind of tactical thinking and attention to detail that comes from military leadership experience. Someone who can see the big picture while managing countless small details. Someone who understands that failure in any one area can compromise the entire mission. Military leadership experience. The phrase hit me like a shock of recognition. For 3 years, I had been defined by what I was doing instead of what I was capable of doing. Marcus Holloway was the first person to see my janitorial work as evidence of leadership rather than proof of limitation. "I want to succeed at this," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "I want to prove that your confidence in me is justified. I have no doubt that you will." He pulled a thick folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "This contains everything you need to know about our current operations. Take today to review it. Get familiar with the systems, meet your team. Tomorrow we'll start implementing some changes I've been considering." Changes? Improvements. I've had some ideas about how we could be more efficient, more secure, more responsive to the needs of our employees. Ideas that require someone with fresh eyes and military precision to execute. He smiled. "I have a feeling you're exactly the person for the job." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of introductions and information. I met with the head of building maintenance, a gruff man named Tom Rodriguez, who had been working in the building for 15 years and knew every pipe, wire, and ventilation shaft in the structure. I sat down with Jennifer Walsh, the head of IT security, who walked me through the complex web of physical and digital protections that kept Meridian Financial's data safe from corporate espionage and cyber attacks. Each conversation revealed new layers of complexity, new challenges that would require the kind of systematic thinking I had learned in the military. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt energized. These were problems with solutions, systems that could be optimized, processes that could be improved. This was the kind of work I had been trained for, even if I had never imagined applying those skills in a corporate environment. By lunchtime, I had filled 3 legal pads with notes and identified a dozen areas where immediate improvements could be made. The procurement process for maintenance supplies was inefficient and expensive. The emergency evacuation procedures hadn't been updated in 5 years. The coordination between different security systems was haphazard at best. Janet knocked on my office door just as I was reviewing the building's floor plans for the 3rd time. "Ms. Chen? Mr. Holloway asked me to see if you'd like to join him for lunch. There's someone he'd like you to meet." The executive dining room was on the 26th floor, a space I had never seen during my 3 years of night shifts. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while elegant tables were set with crystal and silver that caught the afternoon light like captured stars. Marcus was already seated at a corner table with a woman in her 50s, who radiated the kind of confidence that came from decades of breaking barriers and building empires. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Williams, our Chief Operating Officer. Patricia, this is Sarah Chen, our new Director of Facilities and Security Operations." Patricia Williams stood to shake my hand, her grip firm and her eyes sharp with intelligence. "Ms. Chen, it's a pleasure. Marcus has told me quite a bit about you." "All good things, I hope," I said, settling into the chair Marcus indicated. "Very good things. He mentioned that you have military experience." "Which branch?" "Army, ma'am. 8 years active duty, 2 tours in Afghanistan." Something shifted in Patricia's expression, a recognition that went deeper than professional courtesy. "Combat?" "Yes, ma'am." She nodded slowly. "I was Navy myself, back in the 80s when women weren't supposed to be on ships. Different wars. Same challenges." She leaned forward slightly. "Marcus tells me you've been working nights here for 3 years. As a janitor." The word hung in the air between us, and for a moment I felt the familiar flush of shame that had accompanied every conversation about my post-military employment. But Patricia's expression held no judgment, only curiosity. "Yes, ma'am. It was honest work that paid the bills. And now? Now I have a chance to do something that uses more of what I'm capable of." Patricia smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Good answer. The military teaches us that no job is beneath us if it serves a purpose, but it also teaches us not to settle for less than we're worth." She turned to Marcus. She'll do well. I had the same impression, Marcus said. Sarah, Patricia oversees all operational aspects of Meridian Financial. She'll be your primary point of contact for anything that affects company-wide policy or procedure. I look forward to working with you, I said. Likewise, and Sarah, welcome home. Welcome home. The phrase echoed in my mind as we ordered lunch and discussed the afternoon's agenda. Patricia understood something that most civilians couldn't grasp, that leaving the military wasn't just changing jobs, it was leaving a family, a culture, a way of life. Finding your place in the civilian world was like learning to speak a foreign language while everyone expected you to be fluent. But sitting in that elegant dining room, discussing operational efficiency and strategic planning with two people who saw my military experience as an asset rather than an anachronism, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my discharge. I felt like I belonged. The afternoon brought a tour of the building's operational infrastructure, areas I had cleaned but never understood. Tom Rodriguez led me through mechanical rooms humming with the machinery that kept 12 floors of corporate activity running smoothly. We examined HVAC systems, electrical panels, water pumps, and emergency generators, while Tom explained the intricate web of contracts and maintenance schedules that kept everything functioning. The thing about this building, Tom said as we stood in a mechanical room that spanned nearly half a floor, is that most people never think about what's behind the walls. They flip a switch and expect lights. They turn a handle and expect water. They never consider how many systems have to work perfectly for their perfect day to happen. But you do, I observed. Every day. And now you will too. He grinned. It's a big responsibility, keeping the invisible stuff running so the visible stuff can shine. The invisible stuff. I thought about my 3 years of night shifts, the work that happened while others slept, the labor that made other people's success possible. There was dignity in that work, value in that service. But there was also something profoundly satisfying about understanding how all the pieces fit together, about having the authority to improve systems instead of just maintaining them. Jennifer Walsh's domain was equally complex but focused on different threats. The IT security department occupied a floor I had never accessed during my cleaning shifts, a space filled with servers humming like electronic insects and monitors displaying data streams that looked like abstract art. Jennifer showed me how physical security and cybersecurity intersected, how someone with a stolen keycard could access systems that contained financial information worth millions of dollars. Your military background is actually perfect for this, Jennifer explained as we reviewed access protocols and surveillance footage. You understand threat assessment, you know how to think like someone trying to infiltrate a secure position, and you have the discipline to maintain consistent security practices even when they seem inconvenient. What are the biggest vulnerabilities? I asked, studying the bank of monitors that showed every entrance, elevator, and stairwell in the building. Human error, mostly. People who prop open secure doors because they're carrying coffee. Employees who let strangers tailgate through checkpoints because it seems rude to challenge them. Maintenance workers who don't follow proper procedures because they're in a hurry. She paused. We need someone who can create systems that work even when people are being careless or lazy. Military protocols, I said, understanding immediately. Exactly. Clear procedures, consistent enforcement, regular training. The kind of systematic approach that makes following the rules easier than breaking them. By the time I returned to my office at 4 o'clock, my head was spinning with information and possibilities. The scope of my new responsibilities was enormous, but for the first time in years, I felt capable of meeting the challenge. This wasn't just about facilities management or security protocols. This was about creating the infrastructure that would allow other people to succeed, about building systems that would protect and support an entire organization. I was reviewing procurement contracts when Janet knocked on my door. Miss Chen, there's someone here to see you. A reporter from the Business Journal. She says Mr. Holloway approved the interview? My stomach dropped. A reporter? She's here about the company's new initiatives in veteran hiring. Apparently, your appointment is part of a larger story they're doing about corporate responsibility and veteran employment. I felt the familiar flutter of panic that came with unexpected attention. For 3 years, I had been invisible by choice as much as by circumstance. The idea of being interviewed, of having my story told in a business publication, felt like standing naked in a spotlight. Could you ask her to wait a few minutes? I need to speak with Mr. Holloway first. Of course. I called Marcus's direct line, hands shaking slightly as I dialed. Holloway. Mr. Holloway, this is Sarah. There's a reporter here who wants to interview me about veteran hiring initiatives. Ah yes, Amanda Pierce from the Business Journal. I should have given you more warning. She's doing a feature story about companies that actively recruit veterans, and I thought your story would be a perfect example of why that kind of hiring makes business sense. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention. Sarah, you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. But I think it's important for people to understand that veterans bring valuable skills to civilian careers, even when their transition path isn't traditional. I thought about Maya, about the years of being overlooked and undervalued, about the other veterans who were probably working jobs that didn't begin to utilize their capabilities. What would I need to talk about? Just your experience, your military background, your transition to civilian employment, your new role here. Amanda is a good reporter, and she understands the importance of telling these stories respectfully. Okay, I said, surprising myself. I'll do it. Amanda Pierce was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of intense energy that suggested she approached every story as if it might change the world. She set up a small recording device on my desk and pulled out a notebook filled with questions written in neat handwriting. Ms. Chen, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I understand you recently transitioned from a facilities role to an executive position here at Meridian Financial? That's correct. Can you tell me about your background? What brought you to this company originally? I took a deep breath and began to tell a story I had never told in its entirety to anyone. About enlisting in the Army at 19. About learning to lead soldiers in impossible circumstances. About the firefights and IED attacks that had earned me 3 Purple Hearts. About the medical discharge that ended my military career before I was ready to leave. About the months of job searching, the rejection letters. The interviews where my military experience was seen as irrelevant or even problematic. So you took a position as a night janitor, Amanda said, her pen moving steadily across the page. I took a position that paid my bills and allowed me to support my daughter. I've never been ashamed of honest work. But surely that wasn't what you had envisioned for your post-military career? No, I admitted. But sometimes life requires us to be flexible about our expectations. What changed? How did you end up in your current position? I told her about the late-night encounter with Marcus Holloway, about his recognition of leadership qualities that others had overlooked, about his decision to create a position that would utilize my military experience in a corporate environment. That's quite a leap from janitor to director, Amanda observed. It is. But the skills I learned in the military, attention to detail, systematic thinking, leadership under pressure, those skills were always there. They were just being applied to different tasks. What do you hope to accomplish in your new role? The question gave me pause. What did I hope to accomplish? I want to prove that veterans can be valuable assets to civilian organizations when they're given the opportunity to contribute at their highest level. I want to build systems that protect and support this company's mission. And I want to show my daughter that persistence and integrity eventually pay off. Amanda looked up from her notes. Your daughter? How old is she? 7. Does she understand what's happened, this change in your circumstances? I smiled, thinking about Maya's assessment that morning. She said I look like a boss lady now. And do you feel like a boss lady? The question caught me off guard. Did I feel like a boss lady? For 3 years, I had felt like a ghost, a shadow, a woman whose worth was measured by her ability to clean up other people's messes without being noticed. Today I had sat in boardrooms and conference rooms, had been consulted about security protocols and operational efficiency, had been treated as an expert whose opinions mattered. I feel like myself again, I said finally. For the first time in years, I feel like the person I was trained to be. After Amanda left, I sat in my office watching the afternoon light shift across the city skyline. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya's school. She had been selected for the advanced reading program and needed permission forms signed. Another text from our landlord about renewing our lease. A missed call from the veterans clinic about a follow-up appointment for my disability evaluation. The ordinary details of life, but now colored by the possibility of change. Maya wouldn't have to worry about advanced programs she couldn't afford to participate in. We wouldn't have to stay in a studio apartment with thin walls and unreliable heating. I wouldn't have to choose between my health appointments and my work schedule. For the first time in years, I could plan beyond next month's rent. Marcus knocked on my door just as I was preparing to leave for the day. "How was your first day?" "Overwhelming in the best possible way," I said. "There's so much to learn, so many ways we could improve our operations." "I was hoping you'd say that. Patricia mentioned that you had some immediate observations about our emergency procedures." "Several, actually. Our evacuation plans are outdated, our communication systems don't integrate properly, and we don't have adequate protocols for secure document handling during emergencies." He nodded approvingly. "Exactly the kind of systematic analysis I was hoping for. How soon could you have recommendations ready?" "Give me a week to do a complete assessment, and I'll have a comprehensive report with specific improvement recommendations." "Perfect. And Sarah? I hope you know how glad I am that we found each other." Found each other. As if this opportunity had been waiting for both of us, as if the 3 years of night shifts had been preparation for this moment, rather than time lost to circumstance and misfortune. The bus ride home felt like floating. I watched the familiar neighborhoods pass by, but they looked different now, less like a trap and more like a foundation from which to build something better. The corner store where Maya and I bought groceries with carefully counted coins, the laundromat where we spent Saturday mornings feeding quarters into ancient washing machines, the small park where we fed pigeons because it was free entertainment. These places were still part of our life, but they no longer defined the limits of our possibilities. Maya was waiting for me at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, homework spread across the kitchen table, pencil tucked behind her ear in a gesture that reminded me so strongly of myself at her age that it took my breath away. "Mommy!" She launched herself into my arms with the kind of enthusiasm that made every difficult moment worth enduring. "How was your first day being a boss lady?" "It was wonderful," I said, holding her tight and breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the strawberry lip gloss she'd been experimenting with lately. "Tell me about your day." She chattered about math class and playground politics while I helped her finish her homework, her small hand working carefully to form letters that would carry her thoughts into the world. When she paused to erase a mistake, I noticed the holes in her favorite sweater, the shoes that were slightly too small, the backpack held together with duct tape and determination. Soon, I thought. Soon we would be able to afford the things she needed, the things she deserved. Soon she would understand that her mother was more than just tired all the time, that the woman who tucked her in at night was the same woman who had once carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire, who had been decorated for courage under impossible circumstances. But tonight, it was enough to help her with her homework and listen to her stories about friends and teachers and the small dramas that filled her 7-year-old world. Tonight, it was enough to make dinner in our tiny kitchen and watch cartoons on our secondhand television. Tonight, it was enough to know that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove that some stories have better endings than anyone dared to imagine. As I tucked Maya into bed, she looked up at me with those serious dark eyes and asked, "Mommy, are you going to keep being a boss lady forever?" "I'm going to try, sweetheart." "Good," she said, settling deeper under her covers. "I like you better this way." "What way?" "Big," she said, echoing her observation from the night before. "You're big now, like you're supposed to be. Big like I'm supposed to be." Out of the mouths of babes came the truth I had been afraid to acknowledge. For 3 years, I had been living smaller than my capabilities, smaller than my training, smaller than my worth. I had accepted invisibility as safety, had confused humility with hiding. But Maya saw through all of that to the woman I was meant to be, the woman I had always been, underneath the circumstances that had tried to diminish me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to prove that heroes sometimes wear janitors' uniforms until someone is wise enough to look closer. But tonight, I was simply Sarah Chen, veteran, mother, survivor, finally ready to live as large as the space the world was willing to give me. And that space, I was learning, was bigger than I had ever dared to imagine. 3 months into my new role, I discovered that success could be more dangerous than failure. The emergency protocols I'd redesigned had prevented a potential security breach during a server room flood. The efficiency improvements I'd implemented had saved the company nearly $200,000 in maintenance costs. The staff training programs I'd developed had reduced workplace accidents by 60%. Every metric pointed to the same conclusion. Marcus Holloway's gamble on the night janitor with military experience was paying off in ways that no one had anticipated. But success, I was learning, had a way of attracting attention I wasn't prepared for. The Business Journal article had been picked up by national publications. Human resources departments from Fortune 500 companies were calling to ask about our veteran hiring initiatives. Industry conferences were inviting me to speak about corporate security and operational efficiency. My story was becoming larger than my life, and the scrutiny that came with recognition felt like standing in a spotlight when you'd grown accustomed to shadows. The morning that changed everything started with a phone call that came too early and felt too urgent. I was in my office reviewing quarterly expense reports when Janet buzzed through on the intercom. "Ms. Chen? There's a gentleman here from the Department of Veterans Affairs. He says it's regarding your military service record." My blood turned to ice water. 3 years of invisibility had given me a false sense of security about my past, about the circumstances of my discharge, about the administrative nightmare that had followed my medical retirement. The VA was not known for making social calls, especially not to corporate offices. "Send him in," I said, though every instinct trained by years of military service was screaming at me to run. The man who entered my office was in his 50s, wearing a government issue suit that had seen better decades, and carrying a briefcase that looked like it had survived several wars of its own. His bearing was unmistakably military, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he'd seen too many difficult conversations to approach this one with anything resembling enthusiasm. "Ms. Chen, I'm Colonel David Martinez, Veterans Affairs Liaison for the Pentagon. May I sit?" "Of course." I gestured to the chairs across from my desk, my hands steadier than I felt. "What can I do for you, Colonel?" He settled into the chair and opened his briefcase with methodical precision. "I'm here regarding some inconsistencies that have come to our attention concerning your military service record and your current employment status." The words hit me like incoming artillery. Inconsistencies. In military terminology, that word could mean anything from clerical errors to criminal fraud. What kind of inconsistencies? According to our records, you were medically discharged in 2019 due to injuries sustained in combat. You were awarded 3 Purple Hearts for actions during your deployments to Afghanistan. You also received disability compensation based on the severity of your service-connected injuries. I nodded, unsure where this was leading, but certain it wasn't anywhere good. However, our recent review indicates that you've been employed in physically demanding positions that would appear to contradict the disability ratings that determine your compensation levels. The room seemed to tilt slightly. For 3 years, I had been collecting disability payments that supplemented my meager janitor's salary. Payments that had made the difference between survival and homelessness for Maya and me. The idea that those payments might be questioned, might be stopped, might even need to be repaid, made my vision blur around the edges. "I don't understand," I said, though I was beginning to understand all too clearly. "Ms. Chen, you were rated at 70% disability due to spinal injuries from an IED explosion and traumatic brain injury from a mortar attack. Those ratings were based on medical evaluations that indicated significant limitations to your ability to perform physical labor. I've never misrepresented my injuries or my capabilities. Perhaps not intentionally, but working as a commercial janitor for 3 years, and now serving in a high-stress executive position, suggests a level of functional capacity that may not align with your official disability rating." The bureaucratic language couldn't disguise what he was really saying. Someone had noticed that the decorated veteran who was supposed to be too injured to work was not only working but succeeding in ways that made headlines. Someone had decided that my success was evidence of fraud. "Colonel Martinez, with all due respect, my injuries are real, my limitations are real, but I've never let them define what I'm capable of accomplishing. I understand that, And I want to be clear that we're not questioning your service or your sacrifices. But we have a responsibility to ensure that disability benefits are allocated appropriately, especially when there's public attention on a case. Public attention. The Business Journal article, the conference invitations, the corporate recognition that had felt like vindication just hours earlier, now felt like a target painted on my back. Success had made me visible, and visibility had made me vulnerable. What happens now? I asked. You'll need to undergo a comprehensive medical evaluation to reassess your current functional capacity. Depending on the results, your disability rating may be adjusted. If it's determined that you've been receiving benefits you weren't entitled to, there could be financial consequences. Financial consequences. The euphemistic phrase for destroying the life I'd spent 3 years building, for taking away the safety net that had allowed me to provide for Maya while transitioning to civilian employment. How long does this process take? 6 to 12 months, typically. During that time, your current benefits will continue, but any overpayments that are identified would need to be repaid. After Colonel Martinez left, I sat in my office, staring at the city skyline and trying to calculate the mathematics of disaster. If my disability rating was reduced or eliminated, I would owe the government thousands of dollars in benefits I'd received over the past 3 years. Money I'd spent on rent and groceries and Maya's school supplies. Money I didn't have and couldn't repay without destroying the stability I'd finally achieved. The irony was sharp enough to cut. I was being punished for succeeding, penalized for overcoming the limitations that were supposed to define me. The same military that had trained me to adapt and overcome was now questioning whether my adaptation was evidence of deception. Marcus found me in my office an hour later, staring at financial projections that no longer made sense when measured against the possibility of catastrophic debt. Sarah? Janet said you had a visitor from the VA. Everything all right? I looked up at him, this man who had seen potential where others saw only problems, who had given me a chance to prove my worth when the world seemed determined to measure me by my limitations. They're reviewing my disability rating. Someone thinks I'm too successful to be as injured as my medical records indicate. His expression darkened. That's absurd. Is it? I spent 3 years working a physically demanding job while collecting benefits for injuries that were supposed to prevent me from working. Now I'm in an executive position that requires stamina and cognitive function that my traumatic brain injury rating suggests I shouldn't possess. Your success doesn't negate your injuries. Try explaining that to a government bureaucrat who's looking at cost savings and fraud prevention. Marcus sat down across from me, his expression thoughtful. What do you need? Legal representation? Medical advocacy? Character witnesses? The offer of support was immediate and generous. But I knew from experience that fighting the VA was like fighting the tide with a teaspoon. I need to prove that I can be injured and successful at the same time. That my disabilities are real but not absolute. That I've found ways to work around my limitations without pretending they don't exist. Then that's what we'll do. The medical evaluation process was more invasive and humiliating than anything I'd experienced since my initial discharge proceedings. Doctors who had never seen combat questioned the extent of my injuries. Psychologists who had never experienced PTSD administered tests designed to measure cognitive function in sterile environments that bore no resemblance to the dynamic challenges of real-world leadership. I submitted to X-rays that showed the metal fragments still embedded in my spine, MRIs that revealed scar tissue in my brain from the mortar blast, neurological tests that documented the persistent effects of traumatic brain injury. But I also had to demonstrate my current functional capacity, had to perform tasks and answer questions while bureaucrats took notes about my ability to accomplish things I did every day in my job. The worst part was the implication that success was somehow fraudulent, that overcoming adversity was evidence of deception rather than determination. The same qualities that had made me valuable to Marcus Holloway, attention to detail, systematic thinking, leadership under pressure, were now being scrutinized as proof that I wasn't as disabled as my records indicated. Maya noticed the stress even though I tried to shield her from the details. She would find me at the kitchen table late at night, surrounded by medical records and legal documents, trying to build a case for my own legitimacy. "Mommy, are you in trouble?" she asked one evening, climbing into my lap while I reviewed neuropsychological test results. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Is it because you're a boss lady now?" The question cut deeper than she could possibly understand. Maybe, sometimes when people succeed, other people want to make sure they deserve it. But you do deserve it. You're the smartest, strongest person I know. I held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and trying not to think about what would happen if the government decided her mother was a fraud who owed them more money than she could ever repay. The legal battle stretched through the summer and into the fall. I hired an attorney who specialized in veteran disability cases, a former JAG officer who understood both the military bureaucracy and the arbitrary nature of benefit determinations. She helped me document not just my injuries but my adaptations, the ways I had learned to work around my limitations rather than surrender to them. We gathered testimony from my doctors about the reality of invisible injuries, about the way traumatic brain injury could affect some functions while leaving others intact. We collected evidence about my work performance, about the accommodations I made for my physical limitations, about the strategies I used to manage cognitive fatigue and pain. Most importantly, we documented the distinction between disability and inability, between having limitations and being defined by them. I was disabled. The fragments in my spine caused chronic pain that I managed with meditation and careful movement. The brain injury caused cognitive fatigue that I addressed with structured schedules and systematic organization. The PTSD created anxiety and hypervigilance that I channeled into security awareness and threat assessment, but disability didn't mean incapacity. It meant adaptation, accommodation, finding new ways to accomplish the same objectives. The military had taught me to improvise, adapt, and overcome. The VA seemed to believe that overcoming was evidence that adaptation hadn't been necessary. The hearing was scheduled for November 15th, in a government building that smelled like disinfectant and disappointed dreams. I sat at a table with my attorney while a panel of bureaucrats reviewed my case as if I weren't present, as if my life were merely an administrative problem to be solved. The government's position was straightforward. My demonstrated ability to work at high levels of responsibility indicated that my disability rating was too high, that I had been receiving benefits beyond my level of need. They presented my recent success as evidence that my previous claims of limitation had been exaggerated or fabricated. My attorney presented a different narrative. She documented my injuries with medical precision, showed how I had developed coping mechanisms that allowed me to function despite significant limitations, explained how my military training had equipped me to find solutions rather than surrender to problems. The question, she told the panel, is not whether Ms. Chen can work despite her injuries. The question is whether those injuries qualify her for the disability rating she received. The fact that she has found ways to work around her limitations is a testament to her character and training, not evidence that those limitations don't exist. I was allowed to speak on my own behalf, to explain what it felt like to wake up every morning with a spine full of metal fragments, to describe the cognitive fog that required me to work twice as hard to achieve the same results as someone without a brain injury. I talked about the chronic pain that I managed with discipline and determination, about the PTSD that turned every unexpected sound into a potential threat. But I also talked about adaptation and resilience, about the difference between being broken and being wounded, about the military values that had taught me to find ways to complete the mission regardless of the obstacles. I am disabled, I said, looking directly at the panel members. But I refuse to be defeated. If that's a crime, then the military did too good a job training me to overcome adversity. The decision came 6 weeks later, in a letter that arrived on a Tuesday morning when Maya was at school and I was reviewing security protocols for the holiday season. The envelope bore the official seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and my hands shook as I opened it. The panel had ruled in my Gumi-Asai favor. My disability rating would remain unchanged. The investigation was closed, with no finding of fraud or overpayment. I was free to continue my career without the threat of financial devastation hanging over my head. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the months of scrutiny and suspicion, by the implication that success was somehow incompatible with disability, that overcoming adversity was evidence of deception rather than determination. Marcus found me in my office that afternoon, holding the letter and staring out at the city where millions of people pursued their dreams without having to prove they deserved them. Good news? He asked, noting the government letterhead. They decided I'm allowed to be both disabled and successful. Magnanimous of them. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. The thing that gets me is that this whole process started because I was succeeding. Because I was visible. Because I had the audacity to be more than my limitations. And now? Now I go back to work. But I'll always know that success can be dangerous. That excellence can be evidence. That sometimes the penalty for overcoming adversity is having to prove that the adversity was real. That evening, Maya and I celebrated with pizza from her favorite restaurant, the one with the arcade games, and the animatronic animals that had terrified her when she was younger, but now seemed charmingly obsolete. She didn't understand the legal complexities, but she knew her mother had been worried about something for months, and was finally relieved. "Are you going to keep being a boss lady?" she asked over cheese-laden pizza slices. "I am. Forever? As long as they'll let me." "And if they don't let you?" The question caught me off guard. What if someday another bureaucrat decided that my success was suspicious? What if another review board questioned whether someone with my medical history deserved the opportunities I'd been given? "Then I'll find another way to be who I'm supposed to be," I said finally. She nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense. "Like you always do. Like I always do." The simple faith of a 7-year-old who had watched her mother adapt and overcome every obstacle life had presented. Who had seen strength disguised as janitorial work, leadership expressed through security protocols, courage measured in late-night studying and early morning meetings. 6 months later, I stood before a conference of corporate executives and government officials, delivering a keynote address about veteran employment and corporate responsibility. The same story that had nearly destroyed me when scrutinized by bureaucrats was now being celebrated as an example of American resilience and adaptive leadership. The audience gave me a standing ovation, but I found myself thinking about Maya's words, about the difference between being seen and being understood, about the courage required to remain visible when visibility could be dangerous. In the question and answer session that followed, a young veteran in the audience raised her hand. "Ms. Chen, what advice would you give to veterans who are afraid to pursue opportunities because they're worried about losing their benefits?" I thought about the months of legal battles, the investigation that had questioned my integrity, the fear that had kept me awake at night wondering if success would cost me everything I'd fought to build. "Don't let fear make you smaller than you are," I said finally. "Yes, there are risks to visibility, to success, to refusing to be defined by your limitations. But the bigger risk is accepting limitations that don't reflect your actual capabilities. You are more than your worst day, more than your hardest injury, more than the labels people want to put on you." I paused, looking out at the faces in the audience, seeing my own journey reflected in their expressions. The military taught us to adapt and overcome. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to overcome is the assumption that adaptation isn't supposed to work that well. After the conference, I drove home through the city that had become familiar in a way I never expected when I was riding buses to night shifts and counting quarters for the laundromat. Maya was waiting for me with homework spread across our kitchen table, which was now larger, and sat in a kitchen that had enough space for both of us to move around comfortably. "How was your speech?" she asked, looking up from math problems that were becoming more challenging as she advanced through school. "Good. I talked about being brave enough to be who you really are." "That's easy," she said, returning to her homework. "You just have to remember that you're big, like you're supposed to be. Big like I'm supposed to be." The lesson Maya had understood before I did. The truth that had taken me 3 years of invisible work and months of legal scrutiny to fully accept. I was not defined by my injuries, my circumstances, or other people's assumptions about what I was capable of accomplishing. I was defined by my choices, my actions, my refusal to accept limitations that didn't reflect my actual capabilities. I was Sarah Chen, veteran, mother, survivor, leader. I was someone who had carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire and cleaned office buildings with equal dedication. I was someone who could be disabled and successful, limited and limitless, wounded and whole. The Purple Hearts were no longer hidden in a shoebox. They sat framed on my office bookshelf, visible reminders that courage came in many forms, that valor was measured not just in moments of combat but in years of persistence, not just in dramatic rescues, but in quiet determination to be more than the sum of your scars. Maya finished her homework and came to sit beside me on the couch, curling up against my side the way she had when she was smaller, and the world felt less complicated. "Mommy?" "Yes, sweetheart. I'm proud of you." The words hit me with surprising force. For years, I had worried that Maya would be ashamed of having a mother who worked as a janitor, who struggled to pay bills, who seemed smaller than life demanded. I had never considered that she might be proud of a mother who refused to give up, who found dignity in any honest work, who fought for the right to be seen as more than her limitations. "Thank you, baby. I'm proud of you too." "Why?" "Because you taught me something important." "What?" "That being big isn't about what other people see. It's about remembering who you really are, even when the world tries to make you forget." She nodded against my shoulder, and we sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle like distant stars. Somewhere out there, other veterans were fighting their own battles with bureaucracy and assumption. Other mothers were working jobs that didn't reflect their capabilities. Other families were building dreams from determination and hope. My story wasn't unique, but it was mine. A story of invisible work and visible courage, of adaptation and recognition, of the difference between being wounded and being defeated. A story that proved heroes sometimes wear janitors' uniforms until someone is wise enough to look closer, and that the greatest victory is not overcoming your obstacles, but refusing to let them define the limits of your possibilities. The night shift was over, the morning had come, and I was finally, fully, exactly as big as I was supposed to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.